This is TalkTV.
Welcome back. Now, here in the UK, as Labour start gearing up for the next general election, attention now focused on party leader Sir Keir Starmer and his chances of taking that top PM job. Often criticised for hypocrisy and lacking clarity, it seems he's looking to the former leader and three-time election winner, Sir Tony Blair, for direction. Now, recently, in their first public appearance together, Blair effectively gave Starmer his handshake of approval.
Well, you know, if how far you've taken the Labour Party in the last 4 years as any guide to how far you can take the country, will be in good hands. Thank you very much indeed.
Bit of a Labour love in there. Blair had his fair share of controversy, of course, over the years, and the scars of the Iraq War still loom large. So is it a good move for Sir Keir Starmer? We're going to debate that now. Joined in the studio again by socialist and author Grace Blakeley. Down the line by former Labour Party MP Stephen Pound, who did actually serve under Tony Blair. Also joining us, Labour councillor and Momentum member Martin Abrams. Let's start with you, Stephen, if you don't mind, seeing as you served under the man himself. Do you think it would be a good thing for us to have Blair back on the scene?
I think it would be absolutely marvellous, for two reasons. One is there's a slight oddity in the world. What does an ex-president or an ex-prime minister do? And you can either be like sort of Gordon Brown, like a prophet crying in the wilderness, or you fade away, like David Cameron did with a lot of rather dodgy business people. I think Jimmy Carter's probably the only national figure, apart from Tony Blair, who's actually made something of the life after power. So once you accept they've got to do something, you then come to what actually Tony Blair is doing. The single most important thing in politics is to avoid getting away, or to avoid the nonsense of short-termism. And a great many politicians are so risk-averse, they dare not ask the big questions. And the biggest question in the world today is how we in the developing West can actually work with the developing world when it comes to global warming. And that's what Tony Blair's asking the question for, as he was at this Tony Blair Institute conference they had last week. So he's in a unique position. He still has the ability, the sort of hypnotic ability that he displayed so brilliantly on three general elections, to somehow actually articulate and speak these huge issues. So we welcome him back because we do actually need somebody who's got the ideas, who can look over the horizon, someone who, yes, absolutely flawed. Of course he's flawed. There's only ever been one perfect human being on the face of the earth. All the rest of us are flawed. But I welcome him back because he brings energy, he brings ideas, but above all, he brings a global perspective on global problems.
Stephen, you raised a lot of things there, including the fact that, of course, Blair... you made your case very clearly. Blair has been enormously successful post-prime ministership. He's a multi-millionaire. He's got this Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which could be called a sort of soft power international policy initiative. And he consults a lot on the rest of it. But at the same time, I'll come to you, Martin. I think we're about the same age. I'm making assumptions here. But when I hear the name Tony Blair, there is one thing I associate him with, unfortunately, and most prime ministers will be remembered for one thing, and that is the Iraq War. And it's hard for many people under the age of 35 to forget that, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Tony Blair cannot escape the haunting spectre of the Iraq War, which led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, the displacement of millions of refugees. It devastated Iraq's infrastructure and society, and essentially it fostered a lethal sectarianism that ultimately turned into a civil war, spreading terrorism across the region and across much of the globe. So this really feels like an absolutely bizarre approach for Keir Starmer to be kind of welcoming Tony Blair back into the fold, because let's face it, Tony Blair is politically toxic. He is the least popular living Labour leader currently, polling well below people like Gordon Brown and Jeremy Corbyn. And let's remember, it's 20 years since the Iraq War now, and a recent YouGov poll published on the 20th anniversary found a fifth of Britons think Tony Blair knowingly misled Parliament over the Iraq War and should be tried as a war criminal. 1/5 of all Britons believe that. It's incredible that he's even being considered being allowed back into the party, never mind back into the inner circle of Keir Starmer.
Stephen, I will come back to you for your reaction, but let's cross to Grace in the studio then and talk about the fact that, yes, OK, Tony Blair has got this sort of glowing rhetorical style. Stephen brought up the fact of the speech he did recently. He's a brilliant speaker. Can he turn that reputation around, given what we just heard from Martin, the facts that stand as well about the Iraq war?
I think, this debate about Tony Blair often comes down to, he won 3 elections versus he did the Iraq war. And actually, there's a lot more to discuss about Tony Blair, both in and out of office. And also, we need to compare that in reality to what we can see in Keir Starmer. So Blair's policy agenda, for example, it rested a lot on we talked about climate change, bringing the private sector into the response to climate breakdown, which again, we've seen hasn't worked. It was a lot to do with kind of deregulating the finance sector, famously, which helped to lead up to the crisis of 2008. And since he left office, he's been earning, as you said, millions, going around the world, often consulting with authoritarian governments to make that money. Now, there's a lot to critique about Blair, but I also think it's worth, looking dispassionately at his record and saying, yes, he did win 3 elections and he did come in onto the political scene with some very clear ideas, a sense of we're going to change things, this kind of Obama-esque excitement, a very good kind of rhetorical style. And Keir Starmer has a lot of those policies and none of the rhetorical flourish. He's basically backed by the same wing of the Labour Party, which is, of course, why Blair is supporting him. But he doesn't have that same charisma. He doesn't have the same values. It's really just very difficult to say what he even stands for, which is why, actually, I don't even think, even though I don't approve of most of what Tony Blair did, I don't even think Keir Starmer is as good as Tony Blair.
Let's cross back to Stephen and ask you, you've heard all of that. You heard the case put forward by Grace, by Martin as well, and obviously the facts you know about already. Do you think that changes the mood in terms of whether Blair will be accepted back into modern British society, because times have moved on?
Well, I hope people could actually see Tony Blair's career so far in the round. I'm here in Ealing, in my old constituency. Just over the road, there's 3 Kosovar families, and their eldest sons have all been called Tony Blair, because that's the names of their children, because they're so grateful for what Tony Blair did in the South Balkans. And don't forget, he also did the same thing in Sierra Leone, in East Timor. And when it comes to coming up a pro and anti list, pros and cons of Tony Blair, minimum wage, equalisation of the age of consent, I can give you about 65 really, really good pieces of legislation. Whether they stack up against Iraq, I don't know. I'm not prepared to say that. I can't sit in judgment on that. All I can say is that Tony Blair is a man of energy and intelligence and he can articulate ideals in a way that we need it. But I guess back to my basic point. Politicians are terrified of actually committing themselves to the big picture. No politician really in my lifetime has actually done that, because they just don't want to actually look at the global issues. They are obsessed with the parochial impetus. But that's the important thing. Tony Blair is stepping outside electoral politics, and he's actually looking at that big picture. I think the country would be grateful.
Sorry, can I come back quickly on that point about Kosovo and Sierra Leone and Iraq? Because I don't know about you guys, I have actually read Tony Blair's autobiography, found it absolutely fascinating, not least because of the kind of evangelical zeal with which he appeared to approach all of these foreign interventions. And you can see, as he moves from one to the next, from Kosovo to Sierra Leone, to East Timor, to Iraq, there's this sense that he's going to basically save the world. And I actually think that's why he ended up making a lot of mistakes in Iraq. I actually think that's why it's difficult even for him to look back dispassionately over the course of his career. And I think that was really why he became such a toxic figure in politics,
Grace,
and why he still is.
I want to give Martin we've only got about 20 seconds left, Martin. I'm sorry to run out of time like this, but if not Tony Blair, would it be Keir Starmer, your vote?
Well, listen, Keir Starmer needs to remember what platform he stood on during his leadership election with the Labour Party members. He needs to stand on a platform of public ownership, of anti-austerity. We need to look forward, and we need a little bit of hope. We desperately need a little bit of hope. People keep calling the next general election a hopeless general election. So reject the politics of the past and Tony Blair, and let's look forward and let's have a hopeful future.
Hope is good. Hope I can get behind. Look, the 3 of you, thank you very much for a very interesting discussion on the return or the possible return of Blair. Now, Uncensored next tonight, whistleblowers in the US say the government have been